Hello, hello, hello. So we are going to have an amazing session. You see, in this session, I'm going to discuss what's taken me a lifetime. Basically, it's really very simple, but they say the greatest genius discoveries are exceptionally simple. And yet, because they're so simple, they're also so comprehensive. They encompass everything. I remember my father, who's a great scholar in Jewish mysticism, he once said that the simpler something is, the more difficult it is to explain. So, for example, love. There's 1,001 books and poems and songs on love. But what is it? So Hesed actually explains love is attraction. And all forms of love, whether you're attracted to drugs or attracted to a person, attracted to God, they may be different attractions, but attraction is the correct description of that emotion. So the point is, if you have something very good, it can cover literally millions and billions of trillions of different possibilities. And so we all have basically 5 modes. And what's really important to understand is that nobody is intrinsically better than another. I learned something really amazing from the Baal Shem Tov today, that Moses, here's the story, it's an interesting story, that there was a king who heard about the greatness of Moses. And he was a person, there's some people, they could read people's faces. They understand the person from seeing the face. So he took an artist and he paid him to go to the desert and to draw the face of Moses. And he came back and looked at the picture, and it turned out that this person's a murderer and he's every criminal thing that you can imagine. And the king said, "You're a liar. Like, obviously Moses is Moses." So he killed him. Then he sent a second artist. The second artist saw that the first artist did a very good job. So now he was afraid. So he went over to Moses. He said, "What's going on?" So Moses said, "Based on how I was born, I would have been like this. But I worked very hard to change myself, that I should be a good person." He says, and that's the greatest thing. Because if you have innate nature just to be kind and compassionate, how are you going to be when you're pushed against the fence? You know, I once met a Vietnam vet, and he had these little buttons on his hat. And I asked him, what's going on? So he said, my therapist told me that I should wear them to help me with my traumas. So I figured he saw things that traumatized him. So I gave him a little pep talk on that. He said, "I'm not traumatized." Listen to this. It's amazing. "I'm not traumatized by what I saw. I'm traumatized by what I did." You see, I spoke to another Vietnam vet. It's pretty gory, but I just want to bring this out. The Vietnam, I think they were called Viet Congs, they were savages. They delighted in sadism, and they used to take American soldiers and cut their heads off and put them on posts. I mean, sick stuff. But you know what happened is the Americans started doing that back to them, basically like tit for tat. Now, maybe the Americans were doing it just to say, like, this is what will happen to you. But the point is, they did it. That's gruesome stuff. And so the point is that we all have parts in ourselves that we may not even begin to realize that we have. Nobody is born angry. Nobody in the world was born with basically, I'll say it, with a tendency to kill someone. And yet many people till this very day do it. I just spoke to somebody, I don't want to go into the details, but bottom line is, the dictator in North Korea, as we speak, he has terrible concentration camps. He's treating people terribly. And true sadism. And so the story is, you think of that person as, he's somebody else, he's bad. But think about this, Hitler was obviously a sadist. But were all Germans sadists? And how did a whole nation become sadists? So the point is that maybe there's a part of us that also has that potential. And maybe in the right circumstance, that potential could come out. And maybe you wouldn't even realize that you're a sadist when you're doing it. When they have, they've interviewed dictators. And these dictators, they basically, these were African dictators, and they are savages. I don't know, one of them killed 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is, terrible. And so they spoke about the other dictator, this after they were deposed. So, I don't know, the guy's got a home somewhere. So they said, what do you think about him? Terrible, bad man. They said, what about the fact that you did it? Oh, it was different. So you see, a person is capable of doing great evil and not realizing that they are evil. It's a tremendous statement. A person is capable. In fact, I would go so far to say all people that are evil don't realize that they're evil. They always say the other person deserves it. So I don't want to go too much into introduction. That's already 5 minutes and 35 seconds. If you made it this far, good for you. What I'm going to discuss here are the different modes, the 5 main modes that people are in. And you then can decide which mode you want to be in. So the first mode is what's called the mode of Hesed, the mode of kindness. Now, to get to that mode of kindness, you had to have been treated kindly. You had to have been in an environment where people are nice to you. And basically this nice kid growing up in the suburbs in America, things are going well for him. So why shouldn't he want to treat others with kindness? The flip side is the exact opposite, where people are treated viciously. And this is where it's very basically, unfortunately, people can become vicious very quickly. Why? I remember meeting this guy who was the head of the gang in prison, the Hispanic gang. They burnt down the prison. I mean, these were not people to mess with. So he told me, I didn't grow up like you. Where he grew up in Mexico was eat or be eaten. So nobody wants to be eaten, so they eat. But imagine you're in that environment. I have a line. How long would it take me to turn you into a boxer? A minute if I put you into a boxing ring. So if everything's fine, training and this and that, but actually, if you were just put into a boxing ring, you wouldn't have a choice. You'd say, okay, if I don't want to get punched, I better know how to punch. And so the point is that when we're in a state of anxiety, we can change very, very quickly. And anxiety has many different forms. Anxiety also, just like we said before about love, that it's attraction. Anxiety is basically fear. And fear basically means retraction. But there are 2 types of retraction. There's retraction, let's say, in Judaism we speak about yira and pachad. Yira is a fear, and pachad is a panic. So what's the difference between panic and fear? So let's say I'm afraid that, I don't know, I know somebody that was dealing with a case and he was being tried and charged. And so obviously there was a fear that he would go to jail. I believe he was innocent, but the point is that was a fear. It's a fear that was going on for 3 years. And today, he didn't have to go. So the fear is over. And that makes a difference. So what is panic? Panic is when nothing you can do to stop it. Let's say a person sees a train coming. So he's afraid because he sees it's coming. So he's thinking what he can do. What is panic? Panic is when he realizes there's nothing he can do. God forbid somebody's strapped onto the tracks. So, okay, he's afraid because it might be coming, but he's not panicking. Panicking is when he knows that it's about to happen. Now, a lot of people live in panic. And a lot of the panic that goes on, 5% of American population, and it's much higher elsewhere, have social anxiety. They're panicking from people. It's a very real thing. I was a teacher in a 4th grade school. This was a private school. Generally, things are good. And this one kid, it was clear to me that he had anxiety. I want you to understand what I'm going to tell you. I taught this kid for 3 months. And one day I saw him in the playground. I don't remember what it was, why I asked him. But I asked him, do you know my name? This was after 3 months of interacting with him. And he said, he didn't even know who I was. He couldn't even recognize me. And he was in my class for 3 months and I gave him papers and stuff like this. And that shows how great panic can be, that the brain can be replaying this episode or this panic and you're just not in reality. In fact, I went through a state of, post-traumatic stress. I guess it was a state of panic for about a year or 2. I actually have almost no recollection of that time. It's as if it didn't exist. And so It's a very real thing. So what happens to such a person that's in panic? Well, there's basically, somebody calls it grenvy. Grenvy is greed and envy, because you don't want to be kind of feeling, often that panic is actually fear of criticism. Now, if you felt good about yourself, then it wouldn't matter. But let's say you took the shame that somebody heaped on you, obviously they were just being a bully, but you took that shame and you internalized it, and you believe you're shameful, you believe you're bad. So now you're panicking because everybody else probably sees that as well. Then you're trying to change, but you don't exactly know who you're meant to be now because you didn't actually do anything wrong. That's why anti-Semitism always tried to shame the Jews, but it never worked, because the Jews always knew that the anti-Semite is a problem. I was once in a garage station, and I felt bad for them, but we'll call them anti-Semites. Obviously, I look Jewish. Somebody said to me, "Shalom" today. I said, "How do you know I'm a Jew?" So, bottom line is that I smiled at them, which was intentional, actually. And I overheard one saying to the other, "He's smiling." In other words, what were they trying to do? They were trying to make me feel bad. And I smiled at them. I was like, you're a sweet person. I'll say another story. Once I was in a mall, and a Muslim came. And, there's some other Muslims before. They were quite nice. But this guy, I could see very quickly that he just wanted an argument. I wasn't interested in arguing because he can't win arguments. So I said to him, "Tell me, do you love me or do you hate me?" Well, he couldn't say that he loves me, and he couldn't say that he hates me. So he says, the Palestinians. So I said to him, "I just want you to know that I love you." He put his head down and he walked away. So what did I do? I understood his subconscious reason why he was criticizing me. It wasn't Islam. It wasn't the Palestinians. If people cared about Arabs, there are a million, the refugees, 50 million refugees just from Syria, what's going on in Lebanon, what's going on in sort of Egypt, they sort of came back, but what's going on in Yemen, it's a disaster. Libya, disasters of disasters. Where's the whole world? Do they care about them? No, they don't care about Palestinians. They like using Palestinians as a way to shame Jews, just classic anti-Semitism. But the Jew doesn't take it personal, because we've been used to morons for 4,000 years trying to criticize us. So that's number one. If anyone ever criticized you, it's just a guy's a moron. That's all he is. So that's number one. Number two is that what happens if you take that criticism and you internalize that criticism, and now you're panicked about, that's what they call perfectionism, never making a mistake, so you don't get criticized. You know what's going to happen now? Now you're going to have an anxiety disorder. It's called social anxiety. And now it's a big problem. Why? Because first of all, we want to feel better. That's the greed part. Just give me anything to feel better. A lot of times people want money to feel better esteem about themselves. Or maybe somebody won't criticize me. If I had money, they'd respect me. And the other is that we also become envious of the person who has not been criticized. And so this is a very important point. Why? Because what is a bully? He's envious of the self-respect and the joy that the other person has. So what is he doing? He's trying to demean them so they themselves should think that they don't have respect. So the bully pretends like Obama. He's a very, very sophisticated guy. He's a very holy man. He's a good man. Never mind, Obama created all these wars. Just in Syria alone, he's responsible for 500 people, 500,000 people murdered. One man is responsible for that. Started to attack Syria. But apart from that, the point is they're big criticizers. They criticize everyone. Why? Because they're trying to put them down. Like he said to businessmen, you didn't create that. What the hell do you care if the guy did or didn't create it? Answer is he's jealous of their self-esteem. And his whole persona is all fake. It's obviously fake because no one's born with a bully. Actually, one of the Oxford Dictionary terminology for a bully is like a blumbering, like a person that's making himself bigger than he is. Why does he make himself bigger than he is? Because he's been demeaned and he's afraid to show his real personality, so he's showing a fake personality so he doesn't get hurt again. And again, this is all subconscious. You can't blame anyone. So this would affect anyone. As one of my friends say, Dr. Tauber, a great psychologist, he says, this is all reactions. Psychology is reactions. Given that stimulus, as another friend of mine, a psychologist, good researcher, said, basically, trauma is a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. That's the way it goes. So let's review. We just spoke about two possibilities. Possibility number one is that everything is beautiful. So what happens? You go into a kind of la-la land zone. People in this zone are very sweet, but they're also very naive. Let's open up the borders. Let's get rid of our nuclear weapons. A friend of mine was quite involved in the military, and I think he took a group of scouts to one of the nuclear sites. I think it was the general that came to give the kids a tour. So he gave them an example. He says, let me give you an example. If a guy's coming to you with a rock, you need to have a bigger rock. That's why our nukes have to be bigger than their nukes. So one of the kids raised his hand. He says, but sir, why can't you just both put down the rock? So the general says, next question. Now, in a sense, the kid's got a great point. Why are you fighting? But in another sense, he's naive. And that's a very big difference. The difference between the naive person, which is a state of kindness but naive, the critical person, which usually comes from anxiety and criticism. Anxiety breeds jealousy, which breeds criticism. And then you have the mature person and the good person. The mature good person understands that there's good and evil, and he doesn't engage in the evil. He's not the critic, he's overcome it. Usually somebody that's been hurt, but he's overcome it. And he now tries to do good. Then you have other people, and what they do is they just disassociate from reality. In fact, there's a major Pew poll, 10% of America is over 30 million people. That's a lot of people. They don't vote. They're completely disassociated from the political scene. We're not talking about times they just can't handle it and they think of one's more. They're just not in the game. That's 30 million people not in the game, right? Let's call 2 million people are homeless. I don't know if it's still like that, but 50% of homeless people choose to be homeless. In other words, life is too stressful for them. They've gotten out of the game. They're like kind of became what you would call a hermit, a loner. They're in their own little territory. They're going to take care of themselves. And there are many manifestations of this. But basically the person disassociates from society, and that's it. He is going to kind of just do his own thing. Society's whatever, he can't handle it or it's too cruel, just does his own thing. And the last is unfortunately a person who's depressed. A person who's depressed basically disassociates from himself. Basically a depressed person, as opposed to a person with anxiety that might have been repressed, shamed from the outside, depressed person shames himself from the inside. And so therefore this person basically has lowered himself. And this person has kind of really made himself into a nothing and has no energy, has no love for himself, no drive, etc., etc. And there are many different levels to this. Now, what is the best stage that we can be in? The best stage is, and this is after a lot of research, and it comes from Rabbi Schneerson, this is the essence of Judaism. The best stage actually is pretty much kind of like the mature good stage. So you take the experience of the past. You have to overcome anxiety. That's why you have to read my book, Kabbalah Love. You can sign up for a course. You can check out my course. Go to KabbalahLove.org. But the bottom line is, that's KABBALAH love.org. The bottom line is, and this is very critical, you also have to become a godly person, which means you realize that you're not a random. This body, God made it to exist for, I don't know, let's call it the best case scenario, 120 years. So far, nobody's lived beyond 120 years. That means if I'm right now 46, I'm not great at math, but let's say I'm 50, I have another 70 years to go. That's it. Gone. Eaten by worms. So if I want to make my life into the life that God wants it to be, I better get with the program and say, what does God want? Now, I'm not going to go into that subject. It's another subject. But the point that I want to make is that I have to see myself as a soldier of God. I'm here to do his mission, which is basically goodness and kindness. And so this is the conclusion. The 5 different people, and every single person is one of these 5 people. Either you're naive and loving and beautiful, or you're the opposite. You're kind of anxious and nervous, and you have this need to it's called grenvy, greed and envy. And sometimes a person becomes a bully and criticizes. And again, that's not a category that you're stuck in. It's because of the anxiety. You have to overcome the anxiety. And that's where my book, Kabbalah Love, can help. And then finally, you have the mature good person that he's overcome the anxiety. He knows the world, but he tries to do good. And in addition, he understands that he's a spiritual being. He's here on a purpose from God. And that's what he has to do. And that's the best you can do, because obviously God knows best. It's his world, it's his game. If you had the programmer of the game and you listened, you would get the best results. And then unfortunately, you have some people, they've disassociated from society, and others that are, God forbid, depressed. And again, just knowing that you are a precious spark of God in this world to fulfill his mission, and the mission is goodness and kindness. So you go outside of yourself. 99% of our depression is because we didn't give ourselves something that we wanted or think we should have had or we should have done. But actually, if you're a soldier of God, then you have to do good all the time. The past wasn't under your control. The Rebbe once wrote to a survivor that was suffering from survivor's guilt. A lot of survivors felt like, why didn't I do more to help others? And it's a very terrible guilt feeling. And guilt in general comes from the dark side, the Yetzer Hara. He said, if you believe in God, you won't feel guilty. In other words, it wasn't under your control. Your job is right now, what is the extra goodness and kindness that I can do?